beyond the podcast by following Future Forward with Catherine Borgia. Click the links in our show notes to keep the conversation going. And please subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite podcast platform to help us grow this community and reimagine the future together. Welcome to Future Forward with Catherine Borgia, the podcast where I talk to fascinating people and ask them to help us reimagine something in the world. Through my work in local and state governments over the past 2 decades, I've had the opportunity to be inspired by the most incredible people from across generations and disciplines. One theme that comes up again and again in these conversations is the unifying desire for community. Each guest is someone I admire and am eager to learn from. I hope you enjoy hearing from them as much as I do. Hello and welcome to Future Forward. Today we have as our guest Leslie Chervokas. Leslie is a longtime litigator, partner in a New York City law firm, and also the chair of the Women Dems of Westchester County. Her latest project is taking on the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment in New York State. She tells us a lot about that work and also a lot about her feelings on how important civic engagement is to our nation and to our community. Good morning, Leslie. Thank you so much for joining us. Of course, I know you mostly from your political activism in Westchester County, but your day job is being an attorney, and you've spent so much of your career with a major New York City law firm. In preparing for this conversation, I also learned about your advocacy for women and minorities in the legal field in New York. You want to tell me a little bit about that before we jump into the meat of the conversation?
I did some pro bono work for the Sanctuary for Families. Mm-hmm. And in that connection, I had helped them, women who were victims of domestic violence. I assisted them with filing for bankruptcy protection. Mm-hmm. And I also later was working with the New York City Bankruptcy Assistance Project, which served a broader group of people.
So we began this conversation to talk about the Equal Rights Amendment in New York State. Of course, you've been one of the lead advocates and the coordinator, as your role is chair of the Women Dems, for ERA advocacy among Democratic committees in the county. Could you take a step backwards and explain, A, what's involved in the Equal Rights Amendment in New York and what the process was to get to the point that we are now?
Okay, so the New York Equal Rights Amendment, currently the New York State Constitution protects us from discrimination based on race or religion, but it does not include any other categories of protection. So the New York ERA would add additional categories of protection. It would protect us from discrimination based on age, disability, national origin, ethnicity, sex, including sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression, and pregnancy outcomes, and reproductive health care and autonomy. So all those protections would be added by the New York Equal Rights Amendment. I'm sure that many people think that we already have these protections.
Yeah.
It's a constitutional matter. I mean, the issue here is people do think in New York State, we have the New York State Human Rights Law, and protections with regard to reproductive health in our legislation, in our state law already.
Right.
The thing is that regular legislation can be eroded or undone by a subsequent legislature.
Yeah.
Whereas a constitutional provision, in order to change it, once it becomes part of the Constitution, it requires, again, this more rigorous process of not only 2 successive legislatures approving it, but also the people approving it by popular vote. So that gives us much more stable and secure protection with the amendment. And so we need to keep advocating and educating people about all the benefits it will bring to New Yorkers, particularly when some of these protections may be undermined at the federal level. I mean, of course, if there's a federal abortion ban, for example, our state law will not override that. It will, the federal law will override the state law.
We'll have to secede then.
I'm not going to go with that, but we'll have
It's a joke. It's a joke. It's a joke. Yeah. I mean, I do think that New York State, has been the birthplace of a lot of rights movements, but sometimes we're surprised that our legal protection aren't as strong as we believe they are because of the culture of maybe additional acceptance, Senecas in New York, Stonewalls in New York. We think, and this is probably an accurate thought, that culturally New York is a pretty accepting place. But if the law doesn't protect you, then you are not protected. And I don't think that people really realize that. And because of the nature of how laws get made in this state and in every state and in the country, it is very possible that the will of the people could be overridden. So I think when I'm talking to people about ERA, in addition to making the emotional plea that, isn't it about time that these are protected, just really understanding that they are at risk. You might think that they're not because everyone around you and everyone who you talk to and everyone who you see, in your social life believe that, LGBTQ people have equal rights. That doesn't mean that they do, and that is something that we're not that far away. We just last week had the 50th anniversary of when a woman could open a credit card without a man's co-signature. I mean, that is crazy. That is crazy. That is something that our mothers really had to face. And that level, it's not, the history is not that long. It's still recent history. And so people really need to, I believe, understand how much we really do need to work together. And this advice of flip your ballot over is going to be very, very relevant for this November. And that's another thing too. I think people don't really realize that the referenda that appear on the back of our ballots are actually it's a popular vote, right? If the majority of people accept it, then it becomes either, whether it's a project or a funding thing, or in this case, constitutional change. So, I think people really need to understand the power that they have as individuals and as families and as groups.
Right, yeah. And especially in New York State, I do think that it is the popular will for these protections to be enshrined in our Constitution. Yeah. And we are New York. We are in the vanguard in terms of protecting individual rights. So I think that, and freedoms. I mean, that's really what we are all about, the sanctity of individual freedoms, and also obviously functioning, as a collective whole in spite of our differences. Mm-hmm. And so this gives us an opportunity to demonstrate that.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And you touch on a topic that I've heard from a lot of my guests, which is this idea of acting for the greater good, acting in community, understanding that the rights of people who might be in the minority are equally valid to the rights of the people who are in the majority. I agree with you that this, I think, is, if people know about this and understand the importance of voting for this, I believe it will pass overwhelmingly. I think people do know that these are all, I don't know one person who this wouldn't impact, except if you are expecting to die quite young, right? But I don't think anybody really expects that, right? That's not a thing that...
it also helps, like, in terms of the sex, no discrimination. It will help with things like equal pay. Yeah. Women are still behind on equal pay. Yeah. So all these aspects, I think we are a bit relaxed in New York, and we have taken for granted that we have some of these protections, but this constitutional protection, it's subjected to a higher level of judicial scrutiny when there's a constitutional right in our Constitution for something. So that's an added benefit to having this. And it gives us a breadth to argue that many more things are protected constitutionally.
No, I didn't realize that. That's a really good point that I think we should be making to people when we're talking about the ERA, that not only is it more difficult to undo these rights, but it gives you greater standing in any kind of dispute based on any of these conditions, situations, demographics. So it seems like your work, your professional work and your advocacy work really do tie together very nicely. In that context, what would you say if you were looking at the world, either in your advocacy role, in your professional role, or just in your life? What would be the thing that you would most like to change in the way that we do things now?
Well, it's pertinent to the New York ERA. In other words, I think what we need to focus on is increased understanding of our governmental system and of the power of the individual voter. So I think that we should be focusing on training children. As I'm not sure what the right age is. I'm not an educator, but at least in my household growing up, we had regular conversations about politics and government. In school, we didn't start that until I think perhaps age 10, around there.
That sounds about right.
Which is okay. But if classrooms, in classrooms regularly, people are engaging in elections, student elections, and they learn how to make decisions as a collective whole. We should have regular student elections, and we should also train students how to behave as a government would, consider issues that are relevant to the class, and have committee discussions, research the problems, and then arrive at decisions collectively through a democratic process, so that by the time they're adults, this is second nature to them, and more and more integrating it with actual real world government participation. So civics education, I think, is critical, and communication. There are so many times when we think we know what we're saying, and however, that's not what the other person's hearing.
Yeah. I would say the biggest mistake I have made repeatedly in my adult life is assuming the people I'm talking to know something that they don't know. I like almost every sticky situation I've been in my career, in my life, is because of that. Is because I think people are aware of facts that they're not aware of. I think people are understanding my processes about how I make decisions, but they're not. So I would really agree with that. And I also have a recommendation about when you should start, and I think it's second grade. And I'll tell you from personal experience, because my younger daughter's second grade teacher was really, really, really indoctrinated them, Cynthia Birdwell, really indoctrinated them in recycling. And she was the recycling police for about a year, until all of her immediate family of origin just did it by rote. And even now, I'll be at like some big major outdoor event carrying around my recyclable cup till I could find a recycling place, because I know that it would be very, very wrong to not do that. So, I think children are very influential in their families, honestly. And so I think the more that they are engaging, I feel like we have a level of cynicism that we either adopt because of the complexity of life and focusing on all the things you need to focus on as adults, or because we're sort of encouraged to feel like we don't matter and our voice doesn't matter. And that could not be further from the truth. So I love the work that you're doing to really get people engaged. And I think you're right that hitting them younger is the way to go. And have you done anything, to make that reality? Or let me rephrase the question in what we ask most of our podcast guests, which is, what could our listeners do to make that goal a reality?
Well, they could certainly make it a plain to their school boards,
right?
And even individual teachers, that they want civics education in the schools, and to their legislators.
Yeah. In New York State, who should they contact?
Well, they could contact their state senator, their state assembly person. This is something that, I have not yet, I have had this on my list of things to do for quite some time. And I've mentioned it, I've kind of gotten this conversation started.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I as I'm currently focusing on the New York ERA, I am kind of working into that conversation.
Sure.
Let's make sure everybody's educated about this.
And
I also think for youth,
yeah,
they can put a lot of pressure. High school and college age students can bring a lot of pressure, as we're seeing.
Yeah.
A lot of pressure to bear on a subject.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that the past 3 election cycles have really shown the power of the under 30 voter, let's say, that 12 years. Also, one great thing that I think New York State did a while ago, but is really, really, really relevant, is allowing students to pre-register once they are either 16 or 17, and sort of indoctrinating every single vote counts. Every single vote counts. And I was a staffer for the New York State Assembly. I would say we took every communication we got seriously, but if we got communications from kids, that received a lot of attention. So I think that, you're right that the younger people really are very good advocates, very strong advocates, and also this will benefit them for the longest amount of time at the very least. So getting that youth voice is really, really, really important. Leslie, we met many years ago. I don't even know if you remember this. I was still the town supervisor of Ossining then. It must have been for one of Hillary's reelection campaigns, and I recognized that your father-in-law was my predecessor as the Ossining town supervisor, John Chervokas, and he left me a library of books on, funny things, rhyming dictionary. We all know what sort of a clever, fun person he was, but rhyming dictionary, quote dictionary, but also on how to listen, how to be heard, how to make sure you're taking other things, other points of view into that. And some of them I did give to your husband, Jason, who was my colleague at the county, but some of them I still do have. And they're really, I think that at the bedrock, right, communication is really everything. Really, really, really everything.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'm surprised he never gave me those books. I guess he gave me his own instruction.
Right. So when you think back at the beginning of your time, either as an advocate or the beginning of your career, what do you wish you knew then that you do know now?
From the beginning of my career, I think the most important thing is never to give up and learn how to pivot. Again, it's sort of a component of what I was saying before. Like you may be thinking you're on this trajectory, and there are inevitably interruptions in your proceeding toward your goal. So again, pivoting. I think pivoting is so critical.
Yeah. Yeah.
And never give up, but never, keep going.
Yeah. I remember one time, I was complaining to my friend and mentor, Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff, that I didn't have patience. And I really have no patience. And I get angry and frustrated and I want things to be faster. It's a very, very, very common experience that I have. I'm going to be honest, almost every day. But she said, well, you make up for it with perseverance. So I think if you keep going and you can overlook the uncomfortableness of things not going exactly your way, you can actually get things done, even if it takes a little bit longer than you want for that to happen, right?
I certainly can completely relate to that.
So, okay. So for our closing question, Leslie, and thank you so much for your time. I know it is very precious. What do you think is the most important? And I leave that open-ended because I want you to take from whatever part of your life you'd like. What is most important to you?
what is most important to me?
Yeah.
Compassion.
Yeah.
Be it really putting myself, and again, it's a struggle because I think each of us can be focused and egotistical. But let's think about the other. Let's live for others. I think paradoxically, the happiest times of my life have been when I've given something to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think that's a paradox. I think there's a lot of data to support that. It's certainly a very strong human pleasure that I have felt in my life to help other people. And there's even some studies, I was actually just reading this a little bit earlier this week, that people get the most enjoyment out of money that they spend on others or with others. So, you could go out to lunch and enjoy your lunch, but if you take your mother out to lunch, that's money that gives you a lot more happiness and enjoyment. So I think you hit the nail right on the head, Leslie.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
So, Leslie Chervokas, you've known her a long time. I do not know her that well, so it was really interesting to learn about her. Did you, when you talk to somebody that you know so well, or you know pretty well, and through the world that you're in politics and activism, was there anything that you learned today in talking with her?
Yes, for sure, for sure. I know Leslie mostly as the chair of the Women Democrats of Westchester. And in that role, she's done a lot, I think, to really bring people together and to help people meet each other. And that really tied in, I think, with a lot of the things she said today about, the importance of working with people in a respectful manner, the importance of understanding your role in the community and your role in engagement. The other thing I learned, even though I have been working with Leslie on getting the Equal Rights Amendment passed, I did not realize that the protections that you would find in the Equal Rights Amendment in New York would actually, not only would they be good and you'd be more strongly protected if your rights are protected in the Constitution, but I didn't realize that it would give you greater standing if you were involved in any kind of legal matter, court case or legal matter that involved your identity in one of the groups that is protected. So I think that's great. I'm definitely going to, I laugh with Leslie that I say, for me, it's ERA every day. There's not a day that goes by that I don't talk to people about why the ERA is important, but that's a new talking point that I have now. So I didn't know that, and it makes my pitch stronger.
What I really enjoyed learning about Leslie was she's like this high-powered New York City partner in a law firm, but we all have really full lives. We do things other than our jobs. And she has done lots of work as an attorney to elevate women and minorities in her field. Yeah. And then she spends her time outside of work doing all this political activism. And so, which makes sense why what she wants to change in the world is to increase education on civic engagement.
Right. And I think she even touched on this, helping other people is actually very enjoyable. So it's great to be able to do that. It's one of our needs as humans. And that's why I think everything that we have heard about this, about the importance of being connected with other people. And she was a really good example of that from a completely different direction, than other guests have said. Yeah.
Every conversation seems to come back to community and connectivity, doesn't it?
Yes, it's true. And that shows us the importance of why we need that and why we all have a part to play in that. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. It was another good one with Leslie today. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Me too. Thanks so much for joining me today for Future Forward with Catherine Borgia. If you have a suggestion for a Future Forward guest, a question for me, or a comment about what you heard today, please message me through the Future Forward with Catherine Borgia website or click through the link in the show notes. Future Forward is written and produced by Victoria Garrity and edited by David Dibb Shackney. Special thanks to Bethany Arts Community for hosting us in your beautiful space, to Eric Garrity for helping design the studio, Alexa Rudley for technical support, and Andy Mendiglia for providing the music. And I'm Catherine Borgia. Thank you for listening.